r/AskReddit. Police officers of Reddit. Who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught after committing a crime. If the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. What state was this? Also, instead of eating it, why didn't he just flush it down the toilet? With this kind of act he may very well be mentally unstable. Quite literally a r/madlad. Just use a computer. Never underestimate state government incompetence. A guy I went to high school had been stealing from Walmart in a pretty clever way. He would grab video games, MP3 players, beer etc. and throw them away in a trash can in the garden section. The workers never checked the trash contents, and he would just wait, sometimes 5 hours, until they emptied the trash in the back dumpster and hop in to get his items. Once he took a cardboard box from a display inside, filled it with video games, a PS3, and extra controllers. He grabbed some tape and pens, and drew all over the box, and taped it up to make it look used and tossed it. An hour later he had a whole new PS3 and stack of games. He ever get caught? I don't believe so. That's not stealing. That's just taking trash from a bin. As for what they see as trash, it's none of the guy's business. This idea could come in handy. I heard about one person that pulled a shoplifting scam on a large, popular and well-known US retail store. They walked in with some cheap nylon product to get one of those "I walked in with this" stickers they used to put on returning merchandise. The sticker easily peeled off the product and damaged. They walked to the electronics department, grabbed an expensive box off the shelf, and went to customer service. They placed the sticker on the big box and asked if they could return the item without a receipt. Unfortunately, no, not without the original receipt. Dang it, and they walk out. Customer service even gave the doorman the thumbs up, having just interacted with the customer. This took place before widespread inventory controls and cameras absolutely everywhere. I feel like I would remember what I had and hadn't recently put a sticker on. But perhaps I wouldn't be getting paid enough to worry too much about it. A friend of my ex's went to a large chain store, went to sporting goods, picked out a canoe, put it on his head, and carried it out. Apparently it never occurred to security that someone would have the chutzpah to shoplift a canoe. I had a friend whose brother worked at big retailer. His brother would usually be working the door, putting stickers on return items and checking receipts. My friend would walk in empty-handed, and his brother would slip him whatever color sticker that they were using for returns that day. He'd then go pick up whatever TV, car stereo, or yard work items like a chainsaw or weed eater and head straight out the door to the nearest pawn shop. These guys stole thousands of dollars worth of shit over time. I remember an officer telling me about a B&D alarm he and his team responded to. No one was there to report the alarm. It must have been a security monitoring company that called. When police showed up, everything seemed normal. Most lights were off, and there was an employee still working. Explains he was there working late and must have set off an alarm. They almost believed him until he said UHH before saying the name of the company he worked for. After that it was downhill. but with a little more research he would have pretty much gotten away with it. I don't care how long I've been working for a company, I'd probably still say I'm with my dumbest too. I'll be sure not to loiter around any crime scenes now. The dude should have said he was the janitor. That would have explained why he was wearing gloves. Similar actually happened to my current company. Years before I was hired, someone had picked the lock on the warehouse office door and got in. The alarm company called the office, didn't get an answer, then called the police and the company owner. Police arrived before the company owner and questioned the guy. He apparently had a whole Rubbermaid cart with janitorial supplies and was on the phone when they arrived. He claimed he was from a commercial contract janitorial company and had taken the usual person's shift. They didn't mention a security system on this suite in their system, so he didn't know the code. He was just calling his boss to figure out what to do. The police were like, oh, that makes sense. Figure it out with your boss. And were about to leave as the owner shows up. He tells the police we don't have a cleaning contract, and they arrest him. Learned that apparently contract cleaners set off tons of alarms every year, which is why the police don't care as much about it. So I'm also guessing this is a common scam, all things considered. I wonder how many places this dude had hit under this con that didn't have alarm systems / ones that call the owner / ones where the owners live close enough to go there. Most of them are really stupid, so this guy isn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty, and he hid there. For 2 weeks he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night. Massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on cameras. Thought it was just a fluke, so the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed or that one rewired because something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police leaving, he tore down the wall. Had already been working on this apparently and robbed the place, taking his sweet time. Escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole which had a serial number on it and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort though. He did all the hard work pretty well. Guy I went to high school with kept selling this gold necklace under a fake ID to jewelry stores. When he had cash in his hand from the sale, he'd flash a real looking airsoft gun and demand the necklace back. Worked about twice until the third guy knew what the deal was. If someone tried selling this one particular necklace, shop owner went in the back to reference an appraisal book and just called the cops. Funny part was he got like a year for the robberies, but using the fake gun added 5 years to the sentence. There's a golf course / country club in my town that has a PGA tournament scheduled in the next couple years. They have a guy repeatedly breaking in overnight and just lounging around and eating food, all on camera. The club refuses to report it, so they don't hurt their chances of the tournament coming. Like some kinda movie comedy plot. Chaotic neutral. Now wouldn't it be shitty if someone found out the potential PGA clubs for the next couple years and shopped your club? Maybe a rival club? Or just some randomer? A friend of my brother moved to Israel where for a period of time it was / is acceptable to drive with an American driver's license. He was pulled over for speeding, and when asked for his license, gave the officer his Costco card. Costco is a membership-based retail warehouse in the US and a few other countries. The exchange apparently went something like this. Officer, Costco? What is Costco? Friend, it's the state I'm from. Officer, that sounds made up. Friend, there are lots of states you probably haven't heard of. Have you heard of Arkansas? How about Idaho? Officer, I guess not. Friend, well I'm from the small state of Costco. The officer didn't have a response and wound up writing the ticket to someone with a Costco driver's license. Friend framed the ticket and still has it hanging on his wall. Rented a car in Australia. They took copies of my Swedish driver's license and sent me on my way. At the end of my trip, when I was queuing to return the vehicle, they called out for Mr. Corcourt, which is not my name. After quite a few calls and glances in my direction, it started to dawn on me that they were expecting me to come to the counter. And then suddenly I realized what they were actually saying. Corcourt in Swedish means driver's license. They were calling for Mr. Driver's license. Here's one. I knew this guy back in the early 80s. Let's call him Jim. Well, he really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he couldn't ever afford it. So what he did was to drive to London and scout it about for a few days until he found that particular model parked outside a house. He goes back that night with a Slidder hammer, pulls the lock, and steals the bike. He gets it home, puts it in his garage, and completely strips it, so that the only thing left is the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he drags into the weeds at the bottom of his garden. Then he pours fuel over it and burns it a bit. A few weeks pass, and weeds have started growing over it. It's at that point he calls the cops and reports that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops show up, and he explains that he'd just got back from being away and found it. The cops take the frame and note down high name and address. A few days later, the cops call him and say that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classed the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. Now, because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it or if they should throw it. So he tells them that he'd always wanted to build a bike. He gets the frame back from them, repaints it, then puts it all back together and re-registers it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? Mandatory, not a police officer, but the story of the Mumbai Opera House jewelry heist probably belongs here. Sometime in 1987, a guy placed an ad in the newspaper looking for recruits to the CBI, the investigative police agency in India. A bunch of people showed up. He'd rented an office to interview them. He selected 26 of the candidates, told them to assemble the next day near a popular jewelry shop to practice a mock raid. He had a fake search warrant and all handy. Then he led these guys to conduct a raid on the jewelry shop. Together they collected all the jewelry in the shop, took all the cash, and then he asked the trainees to keep a watch on the shop employees while he deposited the stuff. He then walked out and disappeared. Took half an hour for someone to suspect something wrong and call the actual police. They never caught the guy. Never even found out who he was. The balls on that man. I'm laughing imagining the guys letting their guard down, eventually realizing that this dude probably isn't coming back. It's just genius. They made a fairly entertaining movie about it, Special 26. You can watch it on Netflix. This was in the late 90s early zeros. A guy in my dorm came to school solely to deal drugs. He took out student loans, registered for a bunch of 300-person freshman survey courses where he would never be missed, then literally never went to class. All he did was go to raves and concerts and keggers and sell party drugs. After the first semester, he was suspended. He wrote the usual "I was young and dumb and in over my head" sob story and got put on probation for a semester. So he had a repeat of the fall. At the end of the year, he was kicked out and didn't care. He made something on the order of $150k in return for about $8k in student loans to cover a year of housing and tuition. So far as I know, he was never caught. It may have been a short-sighted maneuver in the long run, but in the short run it seemed fairly genius to effectively use federal loans to start your drug business. He should have played the long con. Cash out the $150k, apply to another school with the understanding he would pay cash, live somewhat frugally so the cash lasts, and use his story from the first school for his thesis to get his master's. Not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester as a course. Usually, we'd just have to keep an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or sneak in without paying, and with it being so close to Liverpool there was a fair amount of security on site, you could tell them, as they'd be suited, booted, a high-vis waistcoat on, and usually carrying a radio. Now there were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money that was taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily from 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go round the bars in turn and take all the high denomination notes from each till and stick them in the safe in the main building. So I'm stood there one day, pulling pints doing the barman thing. The security blokes have been round a few times and it's getting steadily busier. Then one bloke shows up on his own, high-vis on and radio in his hand, does the till, leaving the usual receipt, so we can balance up at the end of the meeting. Bit early I think, but hey ho, I've got plenty to do. Then 10 minutes or so later, 2 more blokes show up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." "What mate? We are the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. Matey boy who'd done the till before used to work there apparently, so he knew the drill and he'd been watching the guards and knew just when to time it and what order they were going round the bars in. Apparently he got round 9 or 10 before he decided not to push his luck any further and walked away with about 80 grand. We heard later just took off the high-vis, dumped that in the radio, and he's just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. Close bracket. Not a cop, and wouldn't call this the smartest thing ever, but it was pretty amusing and clever. A while back, there was a series of thefts along the bus lines in my country. People's things kept missing from one city to the next, and nobody had any idea what happened as things were presumably safe in the bottom of the bus which nobody, except the driver, had the access to. What happened? Apparently there were 2 guys, one of whom was really small. You get where this is going. The big guy would put the little guy in a suitcase, buy a ticket to somewhere, load him up with the rest of the luggage, and enjoy the ride, while the little guy went out, stole people's electronics, jewelry, cameras and whatnot, then returned to his suitcase until the ride was over. Not really sure how they caught them, but it was pretty amusing to read about, and I found the whole thing clever enough. Ocean movies leverage this, I think. I'm not a cop, but I worked crime scene. This guy had attached GPS to the bottom of people's cars who owned houses he wanted to rob. He did it to ensure they wouldn't be showing up while he was ransacking the place. There's a great Reddit thread about paranoia of GPS devices being attached to your car by a third party. You've reached the end. You're a star. Destroy the subscribe button for more like that.